Hi, everybody. Welcome in today for our Get Savvy, Grow Your Green Stuff webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about conscious consumerism and what that is and how that interacts with your values and your behaviors and how you can invest in line with those values and behaviors. So I'm Jake Hamilton. I work for the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation within the Division of Banking. We also like to thank Kathy Sweetler and Kamaya Wallace-Bashard for their help putting this webinar together today. And I'll let Andrea introduce herself as well.
And I'm Andrea Pellegrini. You've probably heard me on a lot of other webinars if you've been joining us for a long time. And I work for University of Illinois Systems Student Money Management Center. So I serve students in Urbana, Chicago, and Springfield. And I'm really glad that we've been able to put these slides together for you today.
So collectively, the Get Savvy webinar team represents organizations across the state of Illinois, which rests on the ancestral lands of multiple Native nations, including the Peoria, the Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Muskotan, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasha. So we would just like to acknowledge them and thank them as well. So I know a lot of you have already put in the chat today, but we just kind of want to get an idea for where people are at. We have quite a few participants today. Could you all just post in the chat where you're from, state and county, or just where you're logging in from today? I see one from Urbana. I am in Springfield, if anybody's curious. A couple Bloomingtons, Cook County, Kankakee, St. Joe, Champaign. So lots of Illinois people today. Anybody from out of state? Sometimes we get some out of staters. Oh, we got an Arkansas. Okay. Well, welcome, Cassandra. Okay, so just want to start off going over our learning objectives today. So we are going to define conscious consumerism and the related terminology to it. We're going to explore how values motivate spending decisions. We're going to illustrate methods of comparison shopping that considers conscious consumerism. We want to understand the importance of researching companies to support or invest with. And we also want to identify opportunities to modify spending choices that align more with our values. And just up top here today, we want to say this before we really dig in, but kind of a constant theme today is that your dollars do have power. So good financial management doesn't always mean spending less. Sometimes it means aligning how you spend your dollars with what's most important to you. All right, so we're going to dive into some definitions and terms related to conscious consumerism. So the way we donate, vote, spend, or don't spend our money can illustrate what our personal values are. However, there are many factors that influence our choices when it comes to those consumer activities. Conscious consumerism is a movement whereby consumers vote with their dollar by buying ethical products, avoiding unethical companies, and sometimes not purchasing at all. This is a definition from Nguyen in 2020. And you can see our little chart here. You know how you start with your personal values, your influencing factors, and then how that factors in how do you donate, vote, spend, or don't spend. But we also want to acknowledge that we'll be talking through several examples today, and not all values or choices will be represented in our examples, but your values are valid even if they don't show up in our examples. And the choices we have access to as consumers are not all the same in all situations, geographic locations, or systems. And I think Andrea is going to go over some of these values.
Yes, so this is a lot, right? We're talking about defining your values, and we have this list of different core values up here because values differ widely, and how you prioritize those values can change too, depending on like the situation, your mood, what day it is. There's just so much that goes into kind of what are the priorities when it comes to our values. So this is a very long list, but it is not exhaustive, and it's not inclusive of all the different things or concepts that people may value. So just keep that in mind. Maybe you care about having authority, but only in crisis situations, and you appreciate a little self-indulgence once in a while to balance out your value of self-discipline. For some people, self-discipline might be working out every day, while for others, it might be focused on diligence and being efficient at work or at school. So maybe you value open-mindedness in others, and that's how you make choices about your friendships. There's just like a lot of different ways that our values can impact all of our decisions, not just financial, and how we navigate the world. So thanks to Brooke, who's in the chat sharing links. We have linked a worksheet from Winona State University with more values that might help you reflect on what is meaningful to you and what your own values are and how that might impact your own decisions throughout the day. So we've given you a lot of examples. We've been talking about values. What do you think as of today, right now, during lunchtime, what do you think are your top maybe 3 to 5 values right now? You can put that in the chat. And just so everyone knows, we are recording this, and I think that our colleague Kathy shared that in the chat. So if you do have to drop off, we will make the recording available to all the registrants later. And if you have questions, you can also put in the chat if you have questions throughout today's webinar as well. So in the interest of time, I think we will continue, but thank you, Kathy. Sharing family and security is important. Health and time is important. Family, right? Usually family is at the top, health is at the top, personal growth, security, the environment, balance, independence. There's a lot of different values or core values that are really important to us. So we're all financial educators here facilitating today. So we're gonna show our bias a little bit and talk about money values specifically a little bit. Again, this list, it's long, but it's also not exhaustive, but it provides a few statements for why someone might think that money is important or have value statements around money. So for instance, maybe money is important to you to have in case of emergencies. I very much align with this particular money value because security is an important value of mine. Money is important for allowing risk-taking, spontaneity, and or convenience, like having that cushion to fall back on without feeling guilty or stressed. Money is important for maintaining and or improving your health. Maybe money is important for supporting your own personal brand. So there's lots of different ways that you may view money, why money is important. Maybe just accumulating money by itself is thrilling and that is a value for you. So it's important that we recognize that values can also change over time. We have new relationships, new information, all kinds of experiences that can influence what we value and what our priorities are. So understanding where your own values come from can help you reassess what's most important to you right now, today. So values are related to all kinds of different things, but as being financial educators, we're going to focus a little bit on the money part, of course. If you think about some of your earliest memories about money, how have those memories kind of shaped what your money values are today? How does that impact what your habits are and the behaviors that you have around spending or saving money? What kinds of things have happened to you that have changed your money values over time? How did those experiences change your values? This is kind of what your money story is generally. And just because a habit is based on a value that you grew up with and that served you well in the past, it does not mean you need to maintain that habit if it's no longer serving you well. We want to kind of acknowledge that you are the author of your own money story and recognizing what your values are today, how they may have changed over time, can help you in authoring that story going forward and playing kind of an active role in that. All right, so if you've been a follower for our Get Savvy series for any amount of time, you've probably heard us talk about money scripts at some point in time. Money scripts are unconscious beliefs about money, according to Ted and Brad Klontz, which are researchers that have really studied our unconscious beliefs around money. They created an inventory to help people identify what their money scripts are by responding to a series of value-based statements about money. So Brooks shared the resource in the chat where you can do that inventory online. That research comes out of Kansas State University, and the journal article associated with it is Money Beliefs and Financial Behaviors, the development of the Klontz money script inventory, if you want to look it up, if you're nerds like us. So in general, how we view money management and finances has a lot to do with our money scripts, as you might expect. Most of the time, these money scripts are developed in childhood and they drive our financial behavior throughout our lives, but they can be learned from family members like your parents or grandparents, as well as from other life experiences. Money scripts are usually something that consists of incomplete or conflicting partial truths, which is where some like internal money anxiety or shame might come from. And most of us take our money scripts kind of at face value and don't really explore whether or not they're accurate or if they're helpful to our financial well-being. The 4 types of money script categories is money avoiders, money worshipers, money status, and money vigilance. We're not going to delve any further into money scripts today, but you can kind of watch some of our previous webinar recordings like budget hacks, or sign up for the money and relationships webinar that we have coming up next semester to learn more about the money scripts inventory explicitly. So we're also going to talk a little bit about identity. This is the set of qualities and beliefs that make one person or group different from other persons or groups. I'm going to talk a little bit about my identity. So right now, I am most aware of the educator part of my identity because I'm teaching you, right? And I might be more aware of different parts of my identity later in the day or when I'm doing different things. The important thing to remember is like, we're all diverse and we come from different backgrounds and we have different relationships. And as we already illustrated, value different things, but how aware we are of different parts of our identity changes over time. And this wheel is very much not inclusive of my identity, but it kind of gives you an idea of how I view myself and my relationships with others. Obviously, I talked about educator already. I'm also a PhD student. I'm a spouse. I'm a woman. I like to think of myself as an artist. I am a native English speaker, and I have to be aware of that sometimes when I'm conversing with other people that may not be native English speakers. And I also can't take that for granted when we live in a primarily English speaking society. I'm also millennial. So how aware I am of those different parts of my identity can be different throughout the day or depending on even who I'm surrounded by. And it can influence how I spend or save money. So for instance, like when I'm thinking more about my role as a spouse, I sometimes am more inclined to spend money on gifts or experiences to share with my partner. There might be other instances where I might be more likely to save than to spend, depending on what part of my identity is most salient at that point in time. So we are linking in a worksheet on the social identity wheel from University of Michigan in the chat if you want to reflect on your own identity, since that can impact your spending priorities and habits and some of your choices. So the key thing here is awareness is the key to controlling or changing or even just accepting our own financial choices. So awareness of our identity, awareness of our values, awareness of the systems that we are in are really important for conscious consumerism. And then some people might call conscious consumerism, especially when it comes to the spending or investing piece, they might say ethical shopping or ethical spending or ethical investing. And this usually revolves around whether the mission and actions of the company that you're choosing to spend your money with, or organization, like it might be donations, with that aligns with your values or what you would consider ethical. And there's like tons of rating systems and lists out on the internet that can give you some direction on where to look for ethical companies to support within a wide variety of industries. We've mentioned up here like energy, money, fashion, technology, home environment. You might look at ethical food and beverages, or health and beauty supplies, or transportation, or travel, all kinds of different industries to look at. Just make sure that whatever sources that you're using to identify what are ethical companies, you look at the criteria that they're using to make that list of where these ethical companies or organizations are. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about mindfulness. This is something that you may not have thought of that can help with building awareness of your financial habits and your motivations and just your overall money story. Mindfulness can be a valuable skill to leverage when making purchases or planning for the future, or accepting your relationship with money rather than feeling shame around it. So it's usually defined, mindfulness, according to Oxford Languages, is defined as the quality or state of being conscious or aware of something. According to Gonzalez and Byron, mindfulness is simply noticing the way things are. It's not a technique, it's a skill, the skill of being aware without grasping or denying. And in order to build mindfulness skills, it does require you to be motivated and to practice it on a regular basis. Most people say daily, but if daily isn't working for you, don't get upset about it. That's part of being mindful, right? The practice of mindfulness is accepting the way things are. So doing what you can to be aware of yourself and all kinds of outside factors is very important. Unfortunately, there are like a lot of different definitions and measurements for mindfulness in research. So it's a little bit more at the beginning stages of its development, which makes it difficult to determine all the benefits, but it is used in a lot of different applications. You probably heard it as a buzzword recently, and it can be helpful for drawing awareness to specifically our money habits and accepting what we may view as money mistakes. So that's the conscious part of conscious consumerism, is you need to have some skills to practice conscious consumerism, and mindfulness is one of those skills you can develop to put in your tool chest to be more aware of how you're spending and what your values are and how it aligns with your identity. So money shame was something that we talked about on this previous slide when in reference to mindfulness. According to Tesler, money shame might be a universal human experience, but each of us carries our own types and flavors of it, which are unique as our fingerprints. Your money shame might be tied to a specific experience in your life, your upbringing in general, or none of the above. So the main thing is we all have money shame, regardless of our socioeconomic status or our background. There are some situations that may cause money shame specifically, like maybe you got an inheritance and you use it up in a short amount of time and you feel bad about that. Maybe you lost a home to foreclosure and just moved on and you feel shame around that. Maybe it's you just don't understand some basic financial services, which I'm a financial educator, and I can tell you financial services change all the time. So it's okay to not understand them, and accepting that that's okay and moving forward. So mindfulness offers some opportunities to heal from those types of money shame and more if we just practice it. All right, so I'm going to hand it back over to Jake to talk about aligning our values with consumer behaviors.
Thank you so much, Andrea. So we're going to talk a little bit about, like Andrea said, aligning our values with consumer behaviors. So we just want to engage you in the chat again and ask you, have any of you changed any of your habits to either support a cause you care about, or maybe taken spending away from something for something that you don't support? We might think of doing smaller things like shutting the water off when brushing our teeth to conserve water, or it could be things like making a choice to spend at a local grocery store to support your community. So Nikki says she tries not to use plastic water bottles. Andrea started using bamboo toothbrushes instead of plastic ones. Kathy tries to shop local. Anybody else in the chat? Brings their own shopping bags when they go grocery shopping. That's a big one. I know in certain parts of the state, they actually charge you at the store for plastic grocery bags. In other parts of the state, they don't. Try to support more local businesses. That's great. I will shop at sometimes if I'm getting up early on a Saturday, I'll go shop at a farmer's market when it's nice out, to support local. Stop buying disposable dishes and cutlery. Yep, that's a great one as well. Ina tries to look for brands that don't test on animals. This is Andrea said, putting artists that she likes on her wish list on Amazon. Yeah, you can support small businesses on like Amazon or Etsy, especially when you're thinking about if people are asking you for like gift list with the holidays coming up. So let's move on into the next slide. So we want to talk about identifying your consumer priorities. James W. Frick was a fundraiser and administrator for Notre Dame, this is where we get this quote from, but he said, "Don't tell me where your priorities are, show me where you spend your money, and I'll tell you what they are." So that's kind of an interesting way to think about it. A lot of times we maybe even subconsciously align our spending with our values, and we kind of have this circle here to think about identifying your consumer priorities. So at the top, you want to reflect on values, and then review like your spending history or your investment history, identify where they overlap, use mindfulness to cope with money shame potentially, and identify opportunities for improvement. So there are a lot of causes that people might care about, and there are things to look for or consider when making different types of consumer choices. Again, as Andrea said with earlier stuff, this is just a list. It's not exhaustive. It doesn't reach everything. But for example, if you care about the environment, you may look for products that have zero waste packaging, as some of you noted, or you may prefer to thrift first before buying new. If you care about human rights, you may look for things that are from Black-owned or woman-owned businesses, or that are labeled fair trade, or maybe you buy products from companies that create products in countries with higher labor standards or something like that. If you care about animal rights, you might want to make sure that your hygiene products were developed without animal testing. And if you, like many of you pointed out, if you care about supporting your community, you may shop at like farmers markets or locally owned businesses. There are a lot of different ways to use your dollars or refrain from using your dollars to support what you care about. And we're going to talk, I'm going to hand it back over to Andrea quickly. And she's going to talk about some SMART goals. This is something that she knows a lot about.
We always like to talk about SMART goals and goal setting. And after thinking about your values, you might be motivated to write up some actionable goals to help you better align your financial habits with those values. And writing down your goals is a great way to get started. And they don't have to necessarily be SMART goals, but we like to use this framework just simply because it makes it easier to basically turn your goal into a plan. We know from research that people are much more likely to achieve their goals if they write them down. So we're hoping that writing down SMART goals will make it more likely for you, right? So when you think about the SMART goal method, and there are lots of different ways to interpret the SMART acronym, but we like to use specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, and timely. The specific piece is that the more specific your goal is, the easier it is to visualize and achieve it, right? Which is sometimes hard to do when you're thinking about values that may not have a concrete visual kind of identity. Measurable, can you track your progress? That might be on specific tasks that you need to complete in order to, reach your money goal or better align your money habits with your money values, right? Agreed upon. So for instance, if you have relationships where you rely on someone else or someone else relies on you for financial decision making, making sure that you're communicating that and understanding where there might be differences of values or differences in identity that impacts your individual money stories could be really helpful for making sure that you have shared goals that can get accomplished. And then as far as realistic goes, assessing where your current resources, income, and time are, along with all the other factors in achieving your goal is realistic, is a very important part of making sure that you don't get bummed out, right? We don't want to turn goals into money shame. And it's okay to change things too if new priorities pop up. And timely is just like, what date do you want to have it done by? And you can flex that date when there's new priorities. So that's another part of being aware of your own priorities and that things change over time. All right, so as I mentioned, a few ways of supporting common causes that people care about on one of the previous slides is you may have thought of situations where you thought like the choice that you were making was aligning with your values, only to learn later that it was not the case. Research is a good way to avoid like mistakenly supporting things you don't agree with, though it can kind of get overwhelming and sometimes that can make you feel guilty. We don't want you to feel guilty. We do want you to feel informed and empowered. So it's just important when you are doing your research, especially on companies or organizations, you look at missions and values, as well as the actions that companies are taking if you want to support them or buy from them. And then when it comes to charitable organizations, you want to avoid donating to a fake charity or kind of a risky charity. And we shared, thanks to Brooke, some resources for helping you get started on this research. Google can take you all kinds of different places. So we just gave you a couple sources to help you. The FTC source is really helpful for charitable organization giving. All right, so this is just an example of I want to buy a hoodie, and there are lots of different hoodies out there. But when we're comparison shopping and we're considering what values are important to us, this kind of shows us what extra fields that might be focused on your values you would want to add to your shopping comparison checklist, right? So I want to point out here that none of these options hit all of the values listed. So we have 5 different hoodies here. They all have prices ranging from $19.99 all the way up to almost $150. And the three factors that we're considering is whether or not it's a small business, whether it's local, whether it's green. None of these hoodies hit all of these options. So that's also where choosing not to spend also has power. That's why people choose to boycott certain products or services or organizations, because they want choices that align with their values. I think it's important to acknowledge that it is literally exhausting to research everything. So setting your own rules for when you're going to decide to do that extra research, or defaulting to certain companies or organizations that you feel confident align with your values, is definitely okay, because you don't want to be overwhelmed trying to practice conscious consumerism. All right, so if you've chosen not to spend in the past, what was the reason you chose to stop spending? This is a little bit of a thinker. You got to think about your money story and what kind of relationship you've had. Oh, Kelsey, the values of the owner. Yes. So especially if you feel strongly about something and it's evident that the values of the owner of a company do not align with yours, I can definitely understand choosing not to spend with that company. How they treat employees, yes, that's a big one. Political donations and stances, poor customer service, harassment at the store. Oh, yeah. Stop going to places that didn't respect COVID protocols for safety. That's a big one. We could do this all day. So in the interest of time, we'll move forward. All right, so sometimes it's difficult to stop a behavior or habit, and that's where mindfulness may be a helpful skill to use. Mindfulness can allow you to experience a greater sense of calm, which can be helpful for reducing financial stress, for instance. Life can seem more pleasant and fulfilling when you practice mindfulness, and that can help reduce panic spending or your FOMO shopping. You got fear of missing out, got to get that new thing. It can allow you to savor positive experiences, which can allow you to appreciate what you already have and the experiences that you are paying for even more, which is really helpful. It can allow you to have better ways to deal with painful or difficult situations, which this can be really helpful for having difficult money conversations or preparing for an estate planning conversation, which can be very stressful. It can also increase your ability to concentrate. So this is important for high stress decision making, particularly for low resource consumers that may view every single financial decision as a high stress decision, because it is. So those are some ways that mindfulness may be able to help you. All right, I'm going to hand it back over to Jake to talk about investing in our values.
Thank you, Andrea. I appreciate it. So when we think about, when we think about ethical investing, we wanted to ask you guys what comes to mind for you. It can be a lot of different things. Publicly traded companies are on the stock market to increase their revenue. So when you think about ethical investing, what comes to mind? Andrea said clean energy, humane working environments. It's a great one. It ties back in with how companies treat their employees, health and wellness of others. I see Peg said it's hard to think about. Yeah, well, that's hopefully why you're on the webinar here today, so we can give you some idea of how to think about ethical investing. But it is challenging, but we appreciate that you're here today. So some of the concepts we're going to be talking about, and there are many to consider when it comes to ethical investing. are divesting, socially responsible investing, also known as SRI, as sometimes also called sustainable, responsible, and impact investing. And a further breakdown of that is ESG, which is environmental, social, and corporate governance investments. Talk about investment products by cause. And we're also going to talk about some government-funded investments and how your political decision can also factor in investment concepts. So what divesting is, it's kind of the opposite of investing, but it's the definition is to rid oneself of something that one no longer wants or requires, such as a business interest or investment. It kind of is to dispose of or sell off an asset. You might decide, like we talked about earlier, that you might not want to spend in a company. That's a form of divesting. You also may decide that you want to take any coal investments out of your portfolio so that you can free up your money for other things that you care about. Like Andrea is in favor of clean energy technology. So we just talked about a slide ago, but there's SRI, socially responsible investing, is sustainable, responsible, and impact investing. It's an investment discipline that considers environmental, social, and corporate governance criteria to generate long-term competitive financial returns and positive social impact. And this is from the US SIF, the Forum for Sustainable and Responsible Investing. And I think Brooke is posting in the chat, is including some examples of what ESG criteria might include. But we've also got those on the slide here, like environmental, I'm not going to list these all, but, water use and conservation, sustainability, natural resources, that might be things like maintaining our national parks, social is human rights, avoidance of tobacco or other harmful products. And then for corporate governance, you could think about things like executive compensation or like board diversity. If a company doesn't have a diverse board, that might not align with your values. So the top ESG criteria for money managers, according to the 2020 US SIF Foundation report on sustainable and impact investing trends, it includes climate change, anti-corruption, board issues, sustainable natural resources, and executive pay. Executive pay as a consideration for ESG by money managers rose 122% since the 2018 report on the same trends. And those figures at the bottom, the like 4.18 trillion for climate change and 2.44 trillion for anti-corruption. These are the dollar amounts associated with the particular spending category for these money managers. And this is a graph that shows from the same report the size of sustainable assets. So in the US, professionally managed assets at the year end of 2019 totaled 51.4 trillion. So that's for all assets that are professionally managed. And of that 51.4 trillion, 17.1 trillion were sustainable investing assets. And there's a breakdown on the side there as well. There's by money managers on behalf of individuals and retail investors. So not all of this is individual investors. That's kind of what that breakdown on the right side there shows you, is that some of it's from institutional investors, which we're going to talk about a couple slides from now, like what institutional investors are. But those are things like pension funds and other, large fund investments. So higher ESG is actually, there's research on this, and it actually is associated with higher performance and lower volatility. And this comes from the Harvard Law School Forum on Corporate Governance. So high sustainability companies outperform low sustainability companies in stock market performance. And this was also goes back to even a 2012 Harvard Business School study. But the reason for that is because there are decreased risks from mistakes. So you can think about, for example, how like an oil spill could impact the stock price of a company that deals in like fossil fuels. And there's also increased operational efficiency and the creation of long-term value. So value over time that makes these companies with higher ESG more profitable and outperform lower companies, lower sustainability companies. So some factors to consider when you're thinking about how to invest your money in a socially responsible way. You want to think about which parts of SRI matter to you. Not all of it, like maybe the environmental part is not as important to you as the socially responsible part or the governance part. Maybe you care more about how like a board is structured for a company than you do about how they manage their assets sustainably. So keep in mind what part of SRI matters most to you. You want to keep in mind that your investing goal ultimately is to build wealth. So, I mean, that's still the goal of investments is to build wealth over time and grow your value. You want to think about diversification and costs. It's important to have a diversified portfolio with your investments to mitigate risk. As Andrea pointed out earlier, it's also really important to do your research and stay informed because these things change. Companies can make decisions year to year and change how they're structuring their investments. So you want to be aware of that as well when you're thinking about whether you want to stay invested in a certain company. And with that, you want to be willing to change investment or financial services companies. So we also want to talk a little bit about government-funded investments. And we're going to use Illinois as an example today. I know not everybody in here is from Illinois, but even if like you don't feel you have the personal capital to invest large amounts in the causes that you care about, your voice has power too. And what we mean by that is like your political voice, your vote. You can influence the way that large sums of monies are invested by, reaching out to your local politicians or like your state treasurer. You can talk to them, you can call the office, or you can just refuse to vote for somebody if the way that the state treasurer or government representatives invest does not align with your values. So you can talk to them about where funds like state pensions are allocated, and you can advocate for changes that align with what you care about. So like some examples of this in Illinois is that like the state of Illinois has $25 billion in investments. A lot of that is like the state pension fund. And so when the state of Illinois invests those funds into companies or indexes, that has a lot of weight just simply because of the size of money that they're investing. So political activity in that realm can also influence investments and values that you care about. But investment policies differ by government organizations. Like from state to state. Illinois is a different state from California or Colorado or Texas. So it all kind of matters where you're from, and you can call your government representatives to talk about the investment allocations that they're making. And I think we're going to turn it back over to Andrea for this last bit here about putting all of this that we've talked about into practice.
All right, so we've talked about all these different concepts. We've kind of asked some difficult questions of ourselves and of all of you in the audience. And now we're going to take all that information and put it into a practice, right? So conscious consumerism involves awareness of yourself, your values, your identity, acknowledgement of any money shame or guilt that you may have. It also involves influencing factors, right? So the options that are available to you may be different than the options available to someone else, just based on your geographic location or your socioeconomic status or your access to resources. It also may depend on the choices you have available in the moment and when you need to be making decisions. So those are all factors, as well as what market options you have as well. And then it also involves thoughtful actions, right? We talked about donating, voting, spending, or not spending your money, and what that means for conscious consumerism generally. So mindfulness is one method of kind of addressing conscious consumerism, and some of those methods of mindfulness involve relaxation. So you might practice breathing and body relaxation. It involves internal awareness. So you are acknowledging your thinking mind and how you feel, how your body feels generally as you practice mindfulness. And then it also involves some external awareness of what's going on around you, being present in the moment. That allows you to really hear someone, for instance, when you go to have a conversation, either about money or about something else. Or if you're going to meet with a financial advisor, having the skills to be present in the moment, which you can build through mindfulness, is really helpful as well. And then just being aware of your external spaces, be it touch or through sight or through sound, can really be helpful. So when it comes to mindful money management, at the beginning of your day, you want to try to stay unplugged. Personally, this is very challenging for me. Trying to stay unplugged in the morning in order to set your mental directions up for how the rest of the day is going to go. Early in your day, you want to try to focus on your breath for around 10 to 15 minutes. Also, this one's very difficult for me, but sometimes it's just being present on my walk from my car to my office in the morning and focus on my breathing while I do that focused walk, right? Familiarizing yourself with your own thoughts. Like, we're human, our minds wander. That's what it does naturally. Take mindfulness as a way to become familiar with your thoughts and not try to get rid of them, just acknowledging their existence, even the negative thought patterns. And then that way we're better able to break those habits in the future. So that's really helpful for training your brain to stay present. Another step is to practice, all right? So being consistent is really key. I talked about doing it regularly before. So maybe you don't do it every single day at 8 a.m. Maybe you just try to do it before noon. Maybe you just try at the beginning to start like 3 times a week practicing mindfulness and kind of dedicating some time to it. And then taking the time to visualize your goals is a very helpful practice for mindfulness. You visualize what your intentions are. Make sure to take actions daily towards mindfulness and awareness, and budgeting regularly to create awareness of your own spending habits, right? So when you're in the moment, it's easy to acknowledge the existence of something. But looking back later on, like, your spending patterns can give you a broader perspective, kind of visualize even what your spending looks like over time. All right, so we developed this extended learning list thanks primarily to Kathy and Kamaya, because these are not necessarily hard to understand topics, at least conceptually, but they are difficult to put into practice. So if you want some more ideas on how to enhance your conscious consumerism practice, here's just a little bit of an extended learning list curated by our good friends, Kathy and Kamaya, who are also in the chat and have been helping today. Our next webinar is Planning for the Unforeseen, which is on Wednesday, December 8th at noon. And we're going to be talking about estate planning and how to have these difficult conversations with our loved ones about what to do if something bad happens. So practicing your mindfulness before then can help you stay present in those conversations when we talk about how to address that particular topic with your family. If you have missed any of our previous webinars, I want to check them out. They are on YouTube. And we will stick around for questions for a little bit, but if you need to go eat or go to your next thing, feel free to do so. We will make sure to make this recording available to all the registrants, and have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you everybody for joining. And Andrea and I will stick around for a few minutes if anybody has questions.
Amaya, Kathy, or Brooke, were there any questions, or Nikki, were there any questions that we missed that maybe we should address now?
I didn't see any.
Well, Kamaya or Kathy, since you helped on the slide so much, did you have anything to add that we might have skipped over too quickly? Or
this is Kamaya. No, I thought you guys did a really great job, and especially with the mindfulness stuff, there are online, different techniques online that people can do as you're learning or trying to do mindfulness, because to take practice. And I've been doing it over the last few weeks, just trying to use different breathing techniques, like body check-in techniques. So there are different things that you can find online just as you're getting started that can absolutely help you along that journey to just become a little bit more mindful. And it takes time, it takes practice. Just be really gracious to yourself. If this is something that you're interested in doing, the long-term benefits will be great for you.
And so I have a psychology degree, and I worked in mental health and substance abuse treatment prior to my role and identity as a financial educator. And we didn't really have the word mindfulness that long ago when I was kind of in the field, but it was still something we practiced, just awareness of how we're feeling, how we are observing the world, our perceptions, because that flavors how we interact with other people. And I think it's, Kamaya did a good job of pointing out how mindfulness also can be leveraged in our relationship with money, because it can be complicated.
And I would encourage people not to feel like you got to do all the different strategies and techniques at once. Like, pick something that sounds doable, add it to your skill set, then you can pull it out and use it when you need it, or get it built into a habit.
Yeah.
And then maybe another one will look helpful, and you can, practice that one for a while. And then after a while, they become more habits, I guess, so that if something is going on and you need to, step back, or you need that mindful moment, you can just, it's a piece of you that you pull out easily, instead of it being like, where was that book that told me how to do this, and what am I doing next? So don't, like Kamaya said, give yourself some grace on it.
So Christine asked, what is the mindfulness resources? We shared a few in the chat, but we can move back to our learning list. So Kamaya, did you read the Gonzalez and Byron book? Is that, I think you read it? Oh.
Yes, I did. So really, really great. They focus a lot on stuff happening with the Great Recession and just different challenges arising from there, and provided some really great techniques on how people in general, so not just largely the country going through an economic crisis, but how individuals can incorporate practices in their lives as they deal with different economic crises or just day-to-day money management. So lots of really interesting things that people can practice.
And if you like podcasts, we at Illinois Extension, we have the Family Financial Feud podcast series, and we have two different mindfulness related podcasts. Any other questions?
All right, I think a lot of people have moved on to their next thing. But thank you again for those of you that have stuck around and participated in the chat. And we will make sure to send out the resources along with the slides and this recording once it's all available, hopefully in the next couple weeks. But have a great day, everyone. And thank you again for coming.
Thanks, everyone.